The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 19.
Good afternoon, boys and girls. I'm SRO Toscani, and I'm going to read Chapter 19 of The Adventures of the South Pole Pig. Chapter 19. That's more like it, Amos exclaimed the next morning, staring down at the row of dead rats. Behind the rats sat the sheriff and the larger deputy, like two proud fishermen displaying their latest catch. Rats, on my boat, got a big problem now. Amos nudged with his toe, as if he couldn't believe it was dead. Then he bent down and stroked Sophia's head. Good kitty. I make sure super choice when I catch you. Champion, rat, biter. He chucked Sophia under her chin, which started her to purr. She rubbed her side against his leg. And you, pig. He turned to Flora. How did you get off your chain? Flora stiffened. This time Flora didn't hesitate to fire off kicks. But it was awkward working at the end of the chain, and she didn't feel the same joy inside either. Still, the rat extermination team worked their magic over the next few meals. But each day they killed fewer and fewer. The vermin would run off, clicking their teeth and screeching in frustration. Then it happened. The rats stopped coming. It would have been comforting to think of all of them had been killed, but the sounds of clicks and hissings and chewing remained. Either they learned their lesson, Flora thought, or more likely the two friends had killed off the stupid rats and the only wise, cunning ones were left. Amos was disturbed when he came down one morning. Big problem, he boomed. He placed the pig slops on the floor and leaned over to Sophia. Lots of live rats upstairs in the kitchen again. No more dead rats down here where they come from. What's the problem, cat? Sophia rubbed herself against his legs, but there wasn't a plate of fish in the hands today. Then she made the mistake of picking up some choice from Flora's slop. No! Amos stomped his foot in inches from her tail, making Sophia jump back and hiss. No more free food for you. You gotta be hungry. Your job is killing rats. No dead rats, no food. Amos stayed close while Flora ate her fill. He looked into the shadows from time to time, and when he heard the scurrying of little bodies, he shook his head. Flora was careful to leave few bites for her friend, but as soon as she stopped eating, Amos picked up her bowl. No pig food for cats. Sophia rubbed herself hopefully on his legs, and a second time, but he tossed her off. Do your job, he shouted, and stomped up the stairs. That was rude, Sophia said, and she began to give herself a thorough tongue bath, as if not knowing where her next meal might come from and didn't disturb her. Very rude, said Flora, but it's true. Sophia paused her licking. I have to do my job better. How? Asked Flora. Sophia finished her cleaning with a flourish. Hunt them and then kill them. But how are you going to kill them without me? Flora pulled against her chin. The rope collar dug into her neck. Ha! Sophia doesn't need help. I only need to get started. I have my killer instinct back. Cat attack. Rat hunting is what cats were made for. Flora slumped down on her chair. Catch you later, pig. Don't run off too far. Sophia nudged Flora on the shoulder. Just kidding. I'll stop by and say hi if I get a chance between kills, or when I need a break from hunting. Good luck, Flora sighed, and then forced a smile, watching until the little flag of Sophia's tail disappeared into the darkness. She felt more useless than ever.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 20.
Hello, Mad River families. My name is Mrs. Raleigh, and I'm a literacy support teacher at Beverly Gardens Elementary, and I am here to read Chapter 20 to you today. Chapter 20 begins on page 132. All right, let's get started. For the next few hours, Flora listened to the sounds of the sheriff killing rats. During the silences, she imagined Sophia licking her paw for a moment before going after her next victim. "Good for you," Flora whispered. She tried to get comfortable and let her mind wander to a real job, the one the captain would give her once they got to their destination. She laid her head down, and a snowy scene filled her mind. There were no trees, no grass, no stones. There were no creatures, only whiteness. Then, over the snow came a sled team with a pig at the lead. A blizzard roared down out of nowhere until the dogs couldn't see 10 feet ahead of them. Their leader didn't need to see. She knew the way by heart. She was unstoppable. "Don't you give up on me," she shouted to the dogs behind her. She knew they were exhausted. "Remember this, a sled team is tough. A sled team is strong. We don't give up. And we're a little bit crazy." Flora gave a hop and a wiggle to show her boys how unafraid she was, and then she pulled with all her might. The sled surged forward. Flora slept and dreamed until a new sound woke her. It was a cross between a moan and a meow. Sophia? The cat queen mewed near Flora's ear. "I can't do it." She looked terrible. One of her ears was bloody. A patch of fur was missing from her shoulder. "I'm a failure," she moaned. "Nothing but a hairball. Worthless." "What happened?" Flora sat up. "How many rats did you kill?" "0, Sophia wailed. "They ganged up on me." Flora couldn't help feeling a tiny quiver of satisfaction. "I wish I could help." "I shouldn't need help." Sophia threw herself down on the boards. "Cats are supposed to be independent." Flora tried not to look happy. "You need a team." Sophia licked her paw mournfully and then looked up. "I do not. I'm a loner." Flora shook her head to make the chain rattle. Maybe you could take a crack at this rope around my neck after all." Sophia studied it doubtfully. Then she began to gnaw at the rope. After a few minutes, she gave a very uncat-like squeak. "Did you get it?" asked Flora. "No," Sophia moaned. "I think I broke a tooth." Just then something heavy thudded at the top of the stairs, and the door opened with a bang. "Now I'm going to teach you a lesson for good." Amos came into view. In one hand he held Flora's slops, and he had a stick under his arm. With his other hand, he dragged a lump that thumped down each step. At the bottom, Amos dropped the lump in a heap. "You got a new job." He gave the heap a kick. "I caught you stealing food like a rat. Now you catch rats or you don't eat. Here." Amos threw down the stick. "Bang their heads with this. Lantern and matches are on the stairs." "I wouldn't have to steal if you fed me enough." The heap lifted its head. "Alaric!" Amos put the bowl of pig food down and turned back to the boy. "You and that lazy cat had better kill rats every day or you don't eat at all anymore." Amos grabbed the bowl when Flora was finished. "Only the pig eats for free." He stomped to the top of the stairs and slammed the door. Flora flinched. She knew she needed her strength. Still, she hadn't felt good about digging into a bowl full of food while Sophia and Alaric stood by hungry. Alaric picked up the stick and pounded on the stairs. "I won't be treated like a prisoner." No answer came from the top. "He's in worse shape than I am," whispered Sophia. "If cats were the compassionate sort, I would feel sorry for him." The boy sat on the stairs and put his head on his knees. Flora and Sophia waited and watched. When they got tired of waiting, they curled up together and fell asleep. Flora woke in the night from Sophia tapping on her nose. Flora sat up. "What's wrong?" "Shh, watch this." Sophia was looking toward a flicker of light moving about in the shadows. "He's hunting." Sometimes the light would race one way or another, and sometimes the boy's stick could be heard banging against the floor or the walls of the ship. "He doesn't know what he's doing," whispered Sophia. "You can't hunt rats with a lantern. They'll run and hide." It was true. Flora could hear rats at the opposite end of the hold scuffling around in the dark. But the boy didn't seem to hear a thing. The next morning, Amos tromped down with a bowl of food and a scowl on his face. He glared at Alaric, who lifted his head from the bottom of the stairs, where he had slept the night. He kicked at Sophia, who scuttled out of reach of his big boots, but he didn't say a word. Flora could smell the delicious mixture even before the bowl was set in front of her. The leftovers were still warm. She was hungry as usual, but she wouldn't eat while her companions had nothing. So she stayed where she was and watched Amos's face. "Pig, eat!" he shouted. The food smells made Flora's stomach growl and quiver. "Now everything's wrong on this boat," Amos hollered. "Rats and thieves eat the food upstairs. The pig doesn't eat food downstairs. I'll never be a cook on a boat again." As he grabbed the bowl away, a great splash of gravy and food slopped onto the floor. Amos paid no attention. Marching up the stairs, he glared at Alaric again. "You killed 20 rats. I'll give you another chance." As soon as the door closed, Flora followed her nose to the spot where the food had spilled. Sophia was already sniffing the edges. When Flora heard clicking, she whispered, "Sophia, stand clear. It sounds like the rats are ready to try again." Sophia slinked out of sight. A crowd of whiskers and beady eyes appeared in the dim light. Noses twitched as the rats drew closer to the delicious smell. Flora eased herself into position, ready to bring the hammer down on a rat head. Unfortunately, these were the smart ones. They warily stayed at the edges of the shadows. After a while, Flora slumped down and pretended to be asleep. She made little snoring noises and watched out of the slits of her eyes. A trio of rats came out of the shadows and began licking the gravy. Flora trembled with excitement, but she waited. 2 more rats joined. Flora jumped to her feet and spun around. Pow! She let loose and felt her hooves connect with a pair of heads. Slam! She lashed out again. Sophia flashed from one twitching body to another. Then Flora and Sophia stood back and looked at their handiwork. 3 more. Wow! Flora turned to see Alaric. He had lit the lantern again. Now he stood gazing at them and the rats. "You guys are amazing! What a team!" He reached out and scratched between Flora's ears. It felt heavenly. Sophia didn't even bother to say anything about cats and teams. Instead, she rubbed Alaric's leg. 3 rats. Alaric stood up. "It's a good start." He reached down again, and Flora thought he was going to give her head another scratch. But instead, she felt his fingers working at the rope around her neck and felt the weight of the chain disappear. "Come on, team." Alaric lifted his lantern to show the way. "Let's get to work." I hope you enjoyed that chapter.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 21.
Hi, I'm Miss Sowers, and I am the building substitute at Brantwood, and today I am going to read Chapter 21 from The Adventures of the South Pole Pig. It starts on page 141. At first, Flora couldn't see how they could possibly succeed without bait to bring the rats to them, but Alaric led Sophia and Flora behind a wooden post and put his fingers to his lips. Then he slipped away. from the other end of the hold, a terrific banging began along the wall and the floor. The knocking and trumping came closer and closer. Soon they could hear the sounds of 1,000 tiny feet running toward them. Flora tensed her muscles. "Turn around and wait for it," Sophia whispered. "I'll tell you as soon as they're in place." Flora turned. "Now!" said Sophia. Flora fired her back feet behind her. The rats were thrown into a panic. They ran this way and that. Flora kicked and kicked while Sophia dashed in for the cleanup. As the remaining rats disappeared into the darkness, the lantern bobbed toward them. Alaric fell to his knees, counting in a low voice. "Nice work. 4 more." He laid his stick down and scratched both of his teammates on the head. "What would I do without you guys?" He tossed the dead rats in a pile, and then he was up again. Flora and Sophia took their places for another round. By the time Big Amos came downstairs with breakfast, Flora was back on her chain. Sophia and Alaric stood behind 12 rats in 2 piles, waiting for the cook. Flora looked on with pride. The rats had been hunted down with skill and teamwork. Big Amos peered at the boy and cat as if trying to understand what had happened. "You two wait for me." After putting Flora's slop out, he went back upstairs and returned with his hands full. "Good kitty." He put a plate down for Sophia and patted the cat on the head. "Food for Rat Boy, too. Fresh biscuits and scrambled eggs above deck. Come with me and throw these overboard." Alaric grabbed a bunch of the tails in his hand and followed. He was gone all day, but when he came back with the cook the next morning, he stuck around after Big Amos left. He untied Flora, and all 3 ran to their places. Flora heard the stick begin knocking at the far end of the ship. She and Sophia smiled at each other and waited for their turn with the rats. But this time, just as the first wave reached them, heavy footsteps sounded on the top of the stairs. This panicked the rats even more than usual. Instead of simply running from the sound of Alaric's stick, they began leaping like fish and scurrying in many directions. Flora felt a split second of fear. What would Amos do if he found her unchained again? But she couldn't waste the work that Alaric had done herding the cats. It was too late to hide anyway. Her body went into a crouch, and when Sophia gave the signal, she began spinning and kicking. When the last of the rats had been killed or had escaped, Flora turned to face Amos. But it was not the cook. Standing on the bottom step was another man. He took off his hat and smiled. "I wondered what all this banging was down here. Cook told me some good but mysterious work was being done on our rat problem. I thought I should take a look." He stepped into the floor of the hold and walked toward them. "Amos said it was a cat and boy operation, but it looks to me as if we have a secret weapon." He scratched behind one of Flora's ears and ran his hand down Sophia's back to the tip of her tail. "If I hadn't seen it for myself, I would not have believed it." "Hello, Captain," Alaric stammered. Flora caught her breath. "What's your name, son?" "Alaric, the cabin boy, sir." He brought his feet together and made a clumsy salute. "Well, Alaric, there is no sailor on this boat working harder than you." The captain clicked his heels and saluted in return. "It seems you have found an unexpected role for the ship's pig. I don't suppose the cook knows about this?" "No, sir." Alaric looked down at the floor. He shuffled his feet. "The pig is supposed to be chained up, getting fat. Please don't tell the cook, sir. I'm in plenty of trouble as it is." The captain didn't say anything at first. Then a slight smile tugged at his lips. "Son, you never know who will step up with the brains and talent in a time of need and be the right one for the job. We'll keep this between us." Shouting from the deck above interrupted the moment. The captain looked up. "I'd better run to topside. We're closing in on our final destination, and we've entered iceberg waters. So we need to be on extra alert." As you can imagine, the precipitation that falls on these coastal areas is significant and can cause a problem with visibility. He laid a hand on Alaric's shoulder. "Carry on, soldier." "Yes, sir." Alaric saluted again. "But can I ask you a question, sir?" "If it's a quick one." "What happens to me once we reach our final destination?" "The explorer unloads me and the expedition team, then sails away to pick us up on the other side of the continent. You will be part of the skeleton ship's crew." The captain gave a smile. "Meanwhile, the expedition team and I are going to dog sled across the entire span of Antarctica, something never done before, journeying from food station to food station. If we are successful, we'll have made history." Flora gazed at him with admiration. Now there was a born leader. Something about him reminded her of Oscar. Alaric jumped in boldly. "I was hoping I could go along in the expedition, sir." The captain laughed. Alaric slumped. "I'm sorry," the captain said. "It's much too dangerous for a boy. Besides, the ship needs every available pair of hands it can get for the difficult trip." Another shout crackled from the top of the stairs. Loud, pounding boots came from right above. The captain looked up again. "More icebergs," he muttered. "I'd better get upstairs. Keep up the good work, son." But just as the captain stepped on the bottom stair, a bone-numbing jolt knocked Flora off her feet. Her ribs slammed into the floor and knocked the breath out of her. The sound of splitting wood filled the air, and in a single moment, no one, not even the captain, was in control of anything.
The Adventures of a South Pole Pig, a novel of snow and courage by Chris Kurtz. Chapter 22.
I'm Mrs. Odell, the principal at Seville Elementary, and I get to read chapter 22. So let's get into what is happening with Flora. Flora felt herself skid toward one side of the ship. Barrels and boxes tore loose from their ropes and came tumbling across the hold in the same direction. The crunching sound seemed to go on forever. She came to a stop against a post. For the tiniest moment, nothing moved. Then the ship slowly righted itself. The men above were shouting to one another, but they sounded far away. Flora scrambled to her feet. A small stream of water, just a trickle, really came from nowhere and flowed toward her. She couldn't look at anything else. She just watched the stream as it made its way across the floor. "Sophia," her voice was shaking. From the corner she saw Alaric stand and run for the stairs. "Come on," he shouted. Flora looked around for her friend. "Sophia," she squealed. There was no answer. Instead, the far side of the ship burst open and an icy river washed over her. There was no time to run, no time to scream, no time to even take a breath. The water swept her feet out from under her and carried her, bumping along the floor until she smacked her head into a floating barrel. It then banged her into the ship's wall and sent her swirling away to the other side. When her head poked above the waves, she choked and coughed up and tried to call out, but the cold water had locked up her lungs. Now the water began to rise and foam. Flora was not bumping along the floor any longer, and her feet couldn't touch except when her hoofs hit the underwater boxes. Flora tried to swim to the stairs. Impossible. The freezing current took her wherever it wished. She was not only one struggling. Rats were paddling for their lives all around her. Some tried to climb on her, but the water turned her end for end until she didn't know up from down. Finally, her hooves touched something solid. She hoped it was the stairs. Her head broke free of the foam, and she gasped for air. The water tried to pull her away again, but she scrabbled and fought to keep her footing. It was the staircase. She was sure. The rats found the same escape route. They swarmed up toward the light and through the open doorway. Flora struggled to climb onto a dry step. Just then, something grabbed one of her hind legs. "No!" She desperately tried to pull away, but the thing kept a hold of her, tugging her into the seawater once again. Flora panicked. An octopus must have had one of its giant arms wrapped around her, taking her under. Kick, she told herself, kick with your leg. She turned her head to aim, but before she could lash out, she saw a face. It was not an octopus, it was the captain. His arms came across her back and held on. Her face was gray, as if the water had washed the color from it, but his eyes were clear and questioning. In answer, Flora focused on getting to the next dry step. It was a good thing she practiced pulling that big box around the hold. The weight of the captain's body drove her down into the crouch. She straightened up her legs slowly and towed her load upward. But it was no use. The water was rising faster than she was. She could escape the captain's grasp by kicking him off, and in her panic, she considered it for a second. Then she gathered up her hooves under her and pulled up again and again. Don't give up. She was able to climb 4 or 5 steps until the captain's arm slipped off her back. She looked behind her. The man's head rested on a step, and water was already bubbling around his chin. A pair of swimming rats found a toehold in his shirt, scrambled over his shoulders and up the stairs. Flora turned around, took the captain's shirt collar to her teeth, and pulled. The captain lifted his head and helped by pushing with his hands. Step by step, the two of them began to move out of the rising water, but it was still swirling as high as his waist. Flora felt faint. She couldn't take in air fast enough. Her legs were trembling now from fear, from cold, and from the weight of the captain. She didn't dare let go. She was sure if she did, she would lose him. But she could hardly stand up, and he was starting to slide back. "I'm sorry," she wanted to say. "I failed." A shadow fell over her. Hands reached down to drag the captain up the last few stairs. Flora let go of his collar and stepped aside. Alaric was not a big person, but by sitting on the top step and heaving his whole body backwards, he was able to slowly haul the captain through the door and onto the deck. Flora scrambled after them. The sea had almost filled the hold now. Alaric tried to lift up the captain to his feet, but failed. "I have the captain," he shouted over his shoulder. "Don't leave yet." 2 sailors ran up. Together they lifted the man up by his feet and shoulders and hurried to where the last lifeboat was bobbing next to the ship's rail. Several men reached out to take the captain into their arms and lay him on the bottom of the boat. The 2 had carried, the captain followed. Alaric helped Flora into the boat, climbed over the rail, and stumbled aboard at last. They pushed off, and a few men paddled hard with the oars to create a distance between the small craft and the ship. Flora looked back when she thought she heard barking from the deck, but she couldn't see anything. As Flora felt the lifeboat find its own rhythm against the waves, the Explorer groaned and twisted and tipped over sideways, water streaming down its rounded boards. A wave rose from its roll and clawed at the side of the lifeboat. Flora found her feet knocked out from under her once again, but this time she landed on something soft. It was the captain. He moaned as Flora struggled to get off him. She found her footing, climbed onto the bench seats, and looked out at the waves. The Explorer was still drifting on its side, sinking lower and lower. Then a puff of air bubbled out, as if the ship was breathing its last breath. The men stopped rowing and everyone turned to watch. The ship was there one moment, and then suddenly it was not. No big wave followed this time, no white foam, no sign to mark where it had gone down. It was just gone. Bobbing wooden boxes, barrels, and bits of ship parts were all that left. The iceberg they had struck towered above them like a silent ghost ship, and the men with the oars paddled clear. Flora shivered. She didn't know if it was from fear or cold. She spotted a small brown shape floating near their boat. It was stout-hearted rat, paddling hard, with its long tail streaming out behind. For the first time, Flora felt sorry for her old enemy. The rat's head was swallowed by a small wave. When it popped back up, it seemed less strong, less brave. Flora knew from her own short swim that no land animal could last long in the freezing waters. When the rat went under again, she quickly looked away. On board the lifeboat, some men sat with their heads in their hands and some rowed. No one spoke. Soon they were pushing through a thick soup of ice and ocean. It was hard to see the sea left off and where the land, if one could call it that, began. Ahead of them, another lifeboat was fighting to find a way through, a tiny leaf in rough water. The only sound was knocking of ice against the sides of the boat. Wait, where was Sophia? Flora looked for a spark of orange in the icy water all around. Had she made it onto the other lifeboat by some chance? Flora didn't see how. The frenzy of the past few moments had been terrible, but the picture in Flora's mind of Sophia fighting the freezing water and going down with the ship was even worse. That concludes chapter 22. Stay tuned for chapter 23.